Okay, so in the last video, we touched on one of the most important pieces of Drake's lawsuit. Just to quickly recap, Drake is alleging that Kendrick Lamar insisted that UMG sign a short-term deal with him back in 2023. And during that time, he wanted to see them push him and to give him a reason to sign a longer deal. He wanted them to push him and get him deals and get him to the highest level as possible. And so UMG used Not Like Us and the whole rap battle in an effort to get Kendrick Lamar to sign a longer term deal. And they did it at the expense of Drake. So in that video, I explained to you how that proves motive and that proves malice, if Drake has evidence proving that. Part of the evidence is that Drake says Kendrick Lamar did in fact sign a long-term deal in December of 2024, so just last month. So now I want to talk about what is malice and how does it correlate when it comes to this Drake versus UMG lawsuit. Malice refers to the intent or desire to cause harm to someone. It's that simple. In cases of defamation, malice refers to someone intentionally harming someone's reputation, property, and rights. In this case, we're referring to all three, but mainly reputation. In defamation cases, malice requires proof of actual malice. What that means is knowledge of falsity, falsehoods, or reckless disregard for the truth. Now let's touch on some ways that someone can prove malice in a defamation case. Now, there are several ways to prove malice, but based on reading this entire pleading from Drake and his lawyers, I think they're going to try to prove malice using these three ways. The first one is whistleblower testimony. If you remember, back when Drake filed his original petition, he stated that several employees had been fired by UMG because they advocated on the side of Drake. So what that might mean, and I don't know if this is true or not, we're going to find that out with discovery and with witness testimony. But what that might mean, this is just what I'm gathering after reading this entire pleading, is that there were some employees that heard the plan. They heard the conspiracy and they knew it was wrong. And so when they spoke out, they were fired for it. The second way is through evidence of intention. So basically, with evidence of intention, you have to show that someone knew that the action would cause harm. Part of that being with UMG, they distributed the song knowing that it was inflammatory and defamatory. Side note, in this pleading, Drake's attorneys points to a time where Drake says Sir Lucian Grange made the statement that it is hard to build up a reputation, but only takes 1 minute to ruin a reputation. And lastly, reckless disregard for consequences. You have to basically prove that the corporation acted with indifference to potential harm to others. One of those ways after reading this pleading that I think they're going to show that UMG acted recklessly is by them ignoring their own safety protocols. Drake's lawyers highlight UMG's code of conduct in this petition, and it discusses as part of the code of conduct that artists and employees are supposed to behave in a certain manner. Another way to prove reckless disregard is their failure to act on known risk. Well, how are they going to prove that? Well, UMG had the ability to not distribute Kendrick Lamar's song Not Like Us because they knew that it was both inflammatory and defamatory, yet they still did it anyway. Also, I know a lot of you keep asking, well, why is Drake suing UMG? Why doesn't he just sue Kendrick Lamar? Well, Kendrick Lamar does not owe Drake a fiduciary responsibility. A fiduciary responsibility refers to the legal and ethical responsibility of one party to act in the best interest of another party. In this case, the fiduciary would be UMG and the beneficiary would be Drake. This basically just describes a relationship of trust and confidence. A couple examples of a fiduciary and a beneficiary are like an attorney and a client, trustee and its beneficiary, or a financial advisor and his client. In that type of relationship, there is a duty of loyalty, a duty of care, a duty of good faith, and a duty of confidentiality. Side note, the duty of confidentiality might have been breached if Kendrick Lamar was given a heads up about any of Drake's songs and or if he was able to hear the songs before they came out. It's a duty of confidentiality that was likely breached because how else would he have received that information if not from UMG? Another way for a fiduciary to breach that relationship is through conflict of interest. In this case, there was a conflict of interest because Drake and Kendrick were quite literally having a conflict. One example of a conflict of interest that is highlighted in Drake's lawsuit is where Drake points out that UMG whitelisted several of Kendrick Lamar's songs so that streamers and influencers and content creators could play the songs on their pages without it being flagged. So that enabled them to push the song further and faster. I also want to point out that when Drake first started releasing his diss records, remember Push Ups was not on streaming platforms. It wasn't on DSPs. It was just on YouTube. I think this relationship might be a reason why, because Drake was under the impression in the beginning that there was a conflict of interest that UMG had. And so that he didn't know that UMG was involving themselves in all of this. So Drake attempted to not put UMG in the middle of his conflict with Kendrick by not releasing the songs on DSPs, because then that would mean that UMG was also promoting a song against Kendrick. And that's also a conflict of interest. But then when, Kendrick started putting his music on DSPs, then Drake started putting his music on DSPs. Okay. If you remember, even Taylor Made, well, that got taken down, but like the Heart Part 6 was never on DSPs. It was only on YouTube and on, I think, his Instagram page. Conflict of interest. Maybe he was under the impression that UMG didn't want to be involved in distributing those songs against one another. So yeah, so that's my take on all of this. I have read the entire pleading. I'm reading it again. Okay, I've read it twice thus far. I'm going to read it a third time because when I tell you, it is one of the most perfectly written pleadings I've ever read. Okay, this thing takes you on a walk. It tells you a story. The judge is going to enjoy reading this. Really. Seriously. Anyway, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. But I'm interested to hear what you guys have got to say. I mean, I know a lot of you are like, oh, this is going to get thrown out right away, and this case is going to go nowhere. It's going to go somewhere. It's going to go somewhere. It's going to at least discovery. But based on the way they wrote this pleading and they walked us through everything, this case is not getting thrown out immediately. Unless there's a judge on payroll.